Welcome to Thinkin, a podcast series by Kautilya School of Public Policy.
Oh, well, it's wonderful to be at the Kautilya. Civil service jobs. Towards the end of my career, I happened to go to the difference between a civil servant and unknown to a known unknown. So my decisions have had both positive. They appointed me as the officer on special. He's a very good friend of mine, and I still keep it. An independent, robustly independent body like this. And I don't believe the RBI has much. This was 40 years ago. We're talking about, a different. Mr. D.Subbarao was a.
Hello and welcome to the brand new episode of Thinkin podcast. Today me, Vivek and my co-anchor JD are delighted to welcome Dr. D.Subbarao, former Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. Hello sir, how are you and how you feel here being at Kautilya School of Public Policy?
Oh, well, it's wonderful to be at the Kautilya School of Public Policy. Your dean has invited me to come and talk to students once every month. I look forward to the opportunity. I find the students are very intelligent, curious, and eager to learn, and they keep me on my toes. So I look forward to coming here every month, and in the process of teaching, I learn a lot too.
Why do you think your tenure as a Governor of Reserve Bank of India is prominently associated with your diverse career in the bureaucracy, comparatively with your roles ranging from sub-collector to finance secretary?
Thank you, JD, for that question. It's not just me. Every governor of the Reserve Bank of India is uniquely associated with that job, just because the job of the governor of the Reserve Bank of India is an important public responsibility job, and what the governor does has an impact on people's everyday lives. But apart from that, let me put that response of mine in some context. Yes, I've been a civil servant all my career for about 35 years. I grew from being sub-collector early in my career to be the finance secretary to Government of India towards the end of my career before I was appointed governor. Civil service jobs cover a very wide canvas. As you've seen my career profile, I've done a number of things over 35 years. And towards the end of my career, I happened to go to the Reserve Bank. In the civil service, we've been told to be anonymous. One of the best traits of a good civil servant is to be a backroom boy or a backroom girl and work behind the scenes. And that's what I was trained to be. When I suddenly transitioned from being a civil servant to being the governor of the Reserve Bank of India, it was a different profile altogether, because the governor has to be a public personality, public figure, known to the public, the markets, the media, etc. Just let me give you one example to illustrate the difference between a civil servant and the governor of the RBI. When I first was appointed governor, as you people perhaps know, the global financial crisis erupted within 2 weeks of my being appointed governor. And up until then, I was an unknown quantity as the finance secretary. Not many people knew me. There was a lot of concern about whether I, as a greenhorn governor, would be able to steer the economy through the global financial crisis. And that concern largely was because I was an unknown quantity. And suddenly, in a matter of a week, I transitioned from being an unknown to a known unknown, but I was still unknown. Okay? But yeah, being the governor of the Reserve Bank of India is a high-profile job, and the markets need to understand him and know him, and therefore you associate me with being governor of RBI.
Taking on from there, I was wondering if you could provide a succinct overview of the role that RBI plays in the day-to-day lives of ordinary citizens.
Vivek, that's a very wide canvas question. In fact, I could speak for about 2 hours on the impact that RBI has on people's everyday lives. But I'll try to be brief and give you, like you said, a succinct answer. You know, when I was governor, I used to go around the country. I would often go to a school, village school on the streets, just on the highway, stop the car and walk into a school. And then both the headmaster, teachers, students, they're all surprised by somebody who is coming in. And then they realize that the governor of RBI has come. And they, there's a lot of scurrying around. And then for the teachers, I found that it's very easy to introduce who's come. The governor of RBI is very easy to introduce because they say, oh, this is the guy who signs us currency notes, and people understand. Okay? So people associate the job of the governor of the Reserve Bank, and indeed the Reserve Bank as an institution, with printing currency. Printing and distributing currency is one of the important things that the Reserve Bank does, but it does a number of other things. The main responsibility of any central bank, including the Reserve Bank of India, is to maintain price stability, low and steady inflation. And that is important to people's everyday lives because inflation matters to everyone, especially poor people. So that's a very important responsibility. Along with that, what RBI does matters to growth and employment. And that matters to almost everybody in the country, especially the poorer people. RBI also is concerned about maintaining financial stability. Financial stability is not something that you talk about every day, you understand every day, but financial stability is important for our everyday lives. For example, you, me, all of us have bank accounts. We never worry about whether our money in the bank is safe, whether investment that we make in the stock market is safe, or whether investment that we make in capital markets is safe, because we take financial stability for granted. And one of the important things that the RBI does, of course, along with other financial sector regulators, is to maintain financial stability. So price stability, financial stability, growth, employment, these are all things that RBI does, and they have an impact on people's everyday lives.
In the pivotal years of 2008 to 11, which has been a critical phase of India's economic trajectory, and so you had been the governor of RBI at that particular period of time. So can you elaborate one particular decision at that time that makes you feel that this decision has led to a positive influence on the country's economic development?
That's a difficult question to answer. Besides, it will be presumptuous on my part to say that this is what I decided and this is the impact it's had. Number of things I did in the course of my 5 years as the governor. Some of them had the right impact, some of them were not good judgments, good decisions. So my decisions have had both positive and negative impact on the country's economic management and economic profile. But since you asked me to identify one thing, I want to go back to the global financial crisis, which erupted, as I said, about 2 weeks after I joined the RBI. We did a number of things during that time to maintain financial stability, to maintain calm in the markets so that growth and employment and production are not hampered. And one of the important things that I did was to actually cut interest rates. That was a difficult decision to make because even a month before I went into the RBI, by far the biggest problem that the RBI was managing at that time was controlling inflation and actually raising interest rates. But here I came within a couple of weeks after coming into the RBI, I wanted to cut interest rates, which is actually diametrically opposite to what was being done, changed the policy context, as it were. So that was an important thing that I did, and I believe it had an impact on restoring calm in the financial markets and in the larger public at a very difficult time.
You mentioned about decisions that you took as RBI governor. Some were good, some were great, and some were not that great.
That is correct.
Could you, is there anything that comes to your mind which you felt you could have done better?
Oh, most certainly. For example, as I just told you, to manage the crisis We ran an easy monetary policy, reduced interest rates, infused a lot of liquidity. But it was important to exit from that policy when the crisis was over and when growth started picking up. In the event, I was late in exiting from that policy. I did not raise interest rates soon enough, with the result that inflation caught up. There's an explanation for that, but regardless, I want to say that that was, I would say, a decision that, with the benefit of hindsight, looks like a wrong judgment.
Around the world, you see central banks addressing pressing issues like climate change and income inequality. How do you see the role of RBI in these sorts of situations going ahead?
Well, let's stay with the two big problems, the big challenges that you mentioned, Vivek, which is climate change and inequality. RBI certainly has a role in both of them, and I would think that it's different in either case. Let's take climate change, for example, and these are not very educated views, because climate change has become a much bigger issue after I left the Reserve Bank. And there's a lot of debate around the world these days on what role central banks must play in managing climate change, in particular, what role central banks of emerging economies must play in managing climate change. There are some people who argue that central banks must take an activist role, some who argue that central bank has a role, but it has to be minimal. I tend to go to the minimalist side. For example, certainly there is a role for central bank in ensuring that financial institutions which are exposed to loans which are climate change sensitive are provided for by way of risk weights and provisioning. The central bank, as the financial sector regulator, also has a responsibility to ensure that financial institutions regulated by the central bank, particularly the banks, are forced to disclose as part of the risk management their exposure to climate change variations. Those are necessary things. But beyond that, where the central banks must take an activist role and promote green finance, or encourage financial institutions to lend to industries which are more climate friendly, I'm not so sure, because these are in the realm of politics, and these are things that the governments must do. I'm not sure the central banks must get into it. The second thing that you raised, Vivek, is inequality. Again, there is debate around the world on what role central banks have in managing inequality. And again, there are a wide spectrum of views. I personally believe that central banks, especially central banks of emerging economies like the Reserve Bank of India, should play an activist role in managing inequality, because the policies, decisions, actions of the central bank have an impact on the distribution of incomes and opportunities. And I believe central banks like the Reserve Bank of India must play an activist role.
Could you share your initial reaction and insight upon when you have been appointed as a Managing Director of Varani and Vahini by the then Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh, Shri N.T.Ramarao Garu? And sir, can you give an insight also on the state government running Arak bottling plant?
Thank you, JD. This was 40 years ago. We're talking about a different time, a different era, different context. Mr. N.T. Ramarao was our Chief Minister at that time, and he was a teetotaler himself. Not only was he a teetotaler, but he had contempt for people who drank. So he believed that he must impose total prohibition. But then, of course, for a number of reasons, including the bureaucracy telling him that state excise is a very large source of revenue, we cannot afford to sacrifice that if the government had to meet all other schemes that NTR had. So he withdrew from prohibition, but he said, okay, if I cannot impose total prohibition, at least they must ensure that people drink healthy liquor and do not become vulnerable to drinking adulterated liquor and lose their health and lose their lives. So he thought of this AREC bottling scheme, which is that the government must set up a bottling unit in every district of the state to bottle AREC, seal the bottles and sell it so that people who drink are guaranteed or assured that they're drinking unadulterated liquor. They appointed me as the officer on special duty for implementing that. My first reaction was, why me? There were 300 IAS officers in the state, all of them equally capable, in fact many of them more capable than me to manage this. Why did they pick on me? I had no prior experience in bottling or bottling liquor in particular. I was also worried, peeved that it is a no-end job. You join the IAS, people ask you, why have you joined the IAS? You say, I've joined the IAS to change the world. And then you're made to bottle liquor. And how can you tell your friends, relatives, family that, what's your job? My job is to bottle liquor. But anyway, I had to do it, and I believe, when I thought about it, I realized that I should not have any sense of entitlement like that to any particular job. The government asked me to do this job, I must do it. Therefore, after my initial misgivings, after my initial brooding for about a week, I did take on this job, and in the event, finished that on time, and I believe in good quality. So that is my reaction to this particular assignment. And your second question about government setting up bottling plants,
Yes,
I believe it was started with a good intention, and in as much as people drink liquor and poor people drink liquor, and you can't, if you have total prohibition, you can stop them. But in as much as you don't have total prohibition, I believe the government has a responsibility to ensure that people are not drinking adulterated liquor. So to that extent, I believe it is an important public policy issue.
Sir, we just have a small surprise video for you. We request you to have a glance over it.
Yeah, sure.
Please play the video.
My name is Duvvuri. I hail from village called Valangi in Karnataka district. Subbarao and myself were classmates in science school, Korukonda. We were best friends and he was the topper of the class throughout his career. Later on, he appeared for civil services. There also he taught, he was the first staff fellow to top all India services with a record margin of also the second rank. He went on to become finance secretary in the central government and became also the governor of the Reserve Bank of India. Later on, after his retirement, he went on to become the honorary guest of the Singapore government for about 6 years. His simple, unassuming nature, having not been in the services, he has become a scientist of international repute. I am really proud of being his best friend, and I wish him all the success in his future accomplishments. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak about Dr. D.Subbarao.
Thank you, that's wonderful, JD, wonderful, Vivek. Yeah, Chaudhary is a very good friend of mine, and I still keep in touch with him. Yeah,
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
We just had a little surprise for you
thank you very much.
before we ask the tough question.
You asked me tough questions so far. Yeah.
The election commission has been sidelined kind of on getting these donor information details. Don't you think the election commission should be exercising some form of independence, and it should be an independent body without any political affiliation?
Well, that is not my specialist domain, but since you've raised that question, let me address it. Of course, the Election Commission should be an independent body. It is constitutionally appointed, and not only should it be independent, but it should be seen to be independent. Therefore, all their actions, all their whatever they say, must give credibility, confidence to the larger public, especially in a country like India where a large majority of people are illiterate or their awareness levels are low. It's very, very important that we have an independent, robustly independent body like the Election Commission to conduct elections. We take a lot of pride in our democracy, and that pride arises in part because of the democratic institutions we have. And Election Commission is one of the most important democratic institutions we have.
Sir, what role can RBI and Election Commission play collaboratively to strengthen regulatory oversight of political funding sources?
I don't think the RBI can get into this business of regulatory oversight of election funding. That is beyond the domain of the RBI. In fact, RBI should keep as far away from any issue that has to do with politics. However, RBI has a responsibility for ensuring that there is enough, RBI has a responsibility for printing and distributing currency and ensuring that there is enough currency. How that currency is used is a different proposition altogether, and that is a matter for the government, in particular the finance department, finance ministry, and the enforcement agencies. And I don't believe the RBI has much of a role in this.
We leave the Election Commission and the bonds issue there. This is something that you've discussed previously, but I wanted to highlight it. The southern states have contributed, it has been revealed that they've contributed around 30% to the total GDP of the country, even though their share of the population is quite less. There's a sense that there's an increasing dependency on the southern states from the northern states. Would that be a fair assessment or a fair statement to make? So,
I think that's certainly a statement that is borne by facts. What inferences we will draw from that north-south divide for the evolution of politics and evolution of political economy and economic development in our country is a matter of interpretation, matter of judgment. Certainly, if you take most metrics, for example, growth, broad GSDP growth, gross state domestic product, per capita income, social indicators like fertility, education levels, health indicators, rule of law, investment. Southern states are doing better than northern states, and these facts, these inferences are borne by facts. And the north-south divide is actually widening. Just to give you an example, I saw somewhere, these are very rough numbers, I hope my recall is right. For every rupee that Karnataka contributes to the national tax pool, it gets back about 53 paise. Whereas for every rupee that UP contributes to the national tax pool, it gets back about 1.63 paise, which means that there is some cross-subsidization, not some, but significant cross-subsidization happening from the south to the north. Such cross-subsidization is unavoidable, inevitable, and I would say even desirable in a country, because after all, India is one country and some cross-subsidization is necessary. But there might come a point, the question is, are we reaching a point where we are hitting the limits of such cross-subsidization, and what political implications this might have? Especially if you look ahead to 2 years, in 2026, we are up for a delimitation. And if they actually go by the book, it's quite possible that the southern states will lose Lok Sabha seats to the northern states, which means that at a time when the south is being called upon to subsidize the northern states, it will also losing political clout. So that is a double whammy of adverse combination of political fortunes and economic divergence. So that's a very important issue going forward. Yeah.
Lastly, looking at what the future might hold, the Economist Intelligence Unit (EIU) has forecasted a slightly slower GDP growth rate for the fiscal year 2024-2025 as compared to the previous year 23-24. Do you think that this is a fair assessment, and what would the future hold for the Indian economy going forward?
I don't want to go into specific numbers, but I do agree that it'll be difficult for us to maintain this pace of growth going into the medium term. This year, fiscal 23-24, the government estimate is that the economy will grow at 7.6%. Most analysts believe that it will be somewhere closer to 7%, plus or minus a few percentage points. This growth this year is being driven almost entirely by one engine, which is public investment. And that public investment is being financed by borrowing. There are limits to how far this can go. So we are hoping, and the expectation is that other growth engines, like private capex, like consumption, like net exports, will kick in and fuel growth in the years ahead. But whether we'll be able to maintain 7%, 7.5% is doubtful, because we need not just domestic production, but we also need a more benign world for India to be able to grow. So I hope that India can clock 7.5 to 8% growth. But on a realistic basis, I think potential growth rate might be around 7%.
Well, let's hope that your forecast comes true. So it's a wrap for this edition of the Thinkin podcast. It was delightful having you, getting your insights on monetary policy, regulatory affairs, and life in general. Please do like, share, and subscribe for more policy-related content. Thank you. Jai
Thank you
Hind.
very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.